Billionaire's sister humiliates the black CEO moments later, her $7, 9B, empire implodes. Hello everyone, before we begin today's video, I need your help. We've noticed that the channel is losing traction, and subscribing is one of the best ways you can help us. It's quick, free, and allows us to continue bringing you great content. Your support means everything. Let's keep this channel growing collectively. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's get back to the story. You people don't belong at tables like this. The words sliced through the golden hush of the ballroom like a shard of ice cracking against marble. For a heartbeat, nothing moved. And then the room reacted sharp intakes of breath. A few stifled gasps, a ripple of whispers spreading beneath the chandeliers that glowed like molten constellations above them. The Lexington Grand's Imperial Dining Hall, famed for its gilded walls and impossible opulence, suddenly felt smaller, tighter, as if the oxygen itself recoiled from the cruelty that had just been uttered. At the center of the storm sat Dr. Naomi Cross. A red silk gown wrapped around her frame, the fabric catching the candlelight in soft waves, her posture straight, shoulders relaxed, breaths measured. She wore a diamond-drop necklace, not flashy, just precise, like everything she did. Champagne dripped from her hairline, trailing down the angles of her face and the column of her neck, soaking into the crimson dress until it clung to her body like a second skin. She did not wipe it away. She did not flinch. She simply breathed. Standing beside her, towering in a jade-green gown that shimmered like sharpened glass, was Sabrina Caldwell, sister of billionaire magnate Victor Caldwell, heiress of a legacy built on old money and newer arrogance. Her expression was the kind of rehearsed disdain only the profoundly privileged ever learned to perfect. One hand gripped the nearly empty champagne bottle, its cold breath still whispering from the mouth as the final droplets slid off Naomi's shoulders and pattered onto the white tablecloth. The audience, donors, senators, old money families, tech founders in borrowed sophistication, watched the scene unfold as if it were theater built for their consumption. It wasn't shock that dominated the room. It was hunger, hunger for spectacle, for someone else's humiliation, for the story they would whisper later in the restroom lines and during dessert. Sabrina tilted her chin, voice dripping with the same acidic confidence as the champagne shed poured. "I mean, really," she said, eyes sweeping Naomi from head to toe with slow, surgical disdain. "Look at you. This is a charity gala, not some community center banquet. You should have known better." A tight, uncomfortable laughter fluttered through a few tables, people unsure whether to side with decency or with money. The latter usually won. Before we continue, where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. And if you believe in dignity and justice, hit like and subscribe. These stories spark change. And we're glad you're here. Now, back to Naomi. Naomi sat unmoving. Her calm felt unnatural, almost cinematic, like the center of a hurricane that refused to spin no matter how hard the winds tore around it. Sabrina leaned forward, lowering her voice but ensuring every microphone, every phone lens, every pair of hungry eyes caught every syllable. "That seat belongs to investors," she hissed. "To people with real money, real legacy. Not someone who sneaks in hoping for a photo op." The insult hit the room harder than the champagne. A senator froze mid-sip. A couple exchanged a look thick with unease. A photographer near the back raised her camera just an inch higher. A waiter dropped a fork. Naomi's fingers curled gently around the edge of the table, not in fear, not in anger, but in restraint. The kind of restraint only someone accustomed to being misjudged could master. She lifted her gaze, finally meeting Sabrina's eyes. The chandeliers above them flickered. For a moment, just a moment, the entire ballroom shifted. The laughter died like a candle snuffed out. The orchestra's strings thinned to a hesitant whisper. Even the champagne in fluted glasses seemed to still. Sabrina mistook that silence for victory. She straightened, swept a hand toward security, and declared loudly enough for the whole room to hear, "Escort her out. She is not supposed to be here." Two guards hesitated at the edge of the crowd. They didn't move. Something in Naomi's stillness unsettled them. Something about the way she held her dignity untouched despite the cascade of champagne made even trained men question their orders. A murmur rolled through the guests. Who is she? Why isn't she reacting? Did she sneak in? Maybe she's staff. Look at her dress. No, that necklace. That's not cheap. Naomi slowly lifted her hand from the table, her fingers wet, shimmering under the chandelier glow, rose not in defense, not in retaliation, but as though she were brushing away a shadow rather than champagne. Then she spoke for the first time. Only 3 words. Soft, even, precise. Are you finished? The sentence hung in the air like prophecy. Sabrina blinked, momentarily disarmed. The ballroom felt colder. Somewhere in the back, a phone buzzed with a news alert no one saw yet. A storm was forming, one that would swallow a $7, 9B empire whole. But in this moment, Naomi simply sat soaked, silent, and impossibly composed. And every person watching felt it, even if they couldn't name it. This wasn't the end of her humiliation. It was the beginning of theirs. The ballroom didn't return to life. Not really. The chandeliers glowed as brilliantly as before. The candles still burned in perfect symmetry across the long white tables, and the quartet resumed a trembling note that barely held itself together. But the room itself was frozen, caught between disbelief and a collective tightening of breath. Naomi Cross didn't stand. She didn't wipe her face. She didn't even blink. She simply let the last cold droplets trace the line of her jaw and fall onto the tablecloth, each one echoing louder than the violins. The way she held herself upright, poised, untouched in every way that mattered, made the entire scene feel wrong, as if the script Sabrina Caldwell had expected her to follow had just vanished. Sabrina sensed it. Arrogance has instincts, even if they're shallow ones. That look isn't going to save you, she snapped, lifting her chin as though reclaiming lost territory. People like you never... But she didn't finish, because by then, the crowd had changed. Where earlier they had leaned forward like spectators in an arena, now they hovered in a strange, uneasy balance caught between cruelty and conscience, between loyalty to wealth and fear of misjudging power. Their eyes darted between Sabrina's flushed face and Naomi's stillness. A man in a tailored charcoal suit murmured, "She's too calm." A woman in pearls whispered, "Why isn't she leaving?" Someone else breathed, "This doesn't feel right." Naomi lowered her gaze, not in submission, but in calculation. The soft light struck her cheekbones, turning the champagne on her skin into something closer to gold leaf than humiliation. Her calm didn't shrink. It expanded, filled the room, pressed against the golden walls. A slow shift, subtle but unmistakable, began spreading through the space. Security hesitated again. One of the guards, broad-shouldered, stoic, shifted his stance, uncertain. He cleared his throat and addressed Sabrina gently, cautiously, as if speaking to a fragile explosive. "Mom, are you sure she's the one who needs to be removed?" Gasps rippled. Sabrina's face flashed outrage. "Are you questioning me? Look at her. Shez." She gestured sharply toward Naomi, but didn't dare say the word she wanted to. Even Sabrina Caldwell knew some boundaries couldn't be crossed in public. Naomi finally lifted her eyes. Slow, controlled. A movement so precise the entire table seemed to inhale. Her gaze swept the room, not accusatory, not wounded, just observant, as if memorizing every detail. The glittering faces, the shifting loyalties, the tremble in Sabrina's hands that she tried and failed to hide. It wasn't anger. It wasn't fear. It was recognition. She had seen this scene before, maybe not with chandeliers and champagne, but with the same architecture of arrogance, the same fragile cruelty dressed in wealth, the same instinct to belittle what they couldn't understand. She blinked once, and the whole room felt it, an invisible line snapping into place. Sabrina tried to seize control again, her voice sharp, brittle. "Stop staring like you're above this! You should be grateful you were even allowed through the door." Allowed. The word hit harder than anything poured over her. Naomi's jaw tightened, a small, almost imperceptible shift, but enough to fracture the tension in the air. Enough to make the chandeliers feel too bright, the music too thin, the silence too thick. Someone near the back whispered, "Maybe she is someone." The rumor flickered, traveled, multiplied like fire catching dry velvet. Across the room, a young journalist raised her phone not to record Naomi being humiliated, but to focus on Sabrina's trembling hand still gripping the champagne bottle. The narrative was shifting. Naomi exhaled slowly, and the exhale felt like a decision. She placed her fingertips lightly on the edge of the table, the gesture elegant, deliberate like an overture. Droplets slid from her wrist to the cloth, darkening it one small circle at a time, marking the rhythm of a storm about to break. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. The room already knew. Whatever came next wouldn't be loud. It wouldn't be theatrical. It would be exact, and it would be devastating. Because some people scream to reclaim power. But Naomi Cross, she only had to breathe. It didn't take long for the whispers to evolve into narratives. That was always the danger in rooms like this. Gilded chambers filled with people who dressed their biases in polished language and $1,000 smiles. A single insult could bloom into an entire mythology just to keep privilege comfortable. And tonight, the mythology started with a woman at table 9. She must be a +1, she murmured, her rings clicking against her champagne flute. Look at her dress, beautiful, but not designer. Another voice chimed in from behind a towering candelabrum. No one that important sits alone. She's probably here by mistake. A man in a midnight tuxedo leaned closer to his companion. Or maybe she's staff? Some hotels have progressive policies, he whispered, as if the word progressive were something sour on his tongue. The comments weren't shouted. They didn't need to be. False civility was more corrosive than open cruelty. Sabrina Caldwell heard every word, and their murmurs emboldened her. This room had always adored her, had always rewarded her tantrums with attention and her arrogance with applause. Her beauty, her family name, her access to wealth, they built a cage of mirrors where she could only see herself as untouchable. And Naomi? To her, Naomi was an imperfection on a flawless evening, an interruption. A reminder that the world didn't always bow to the Caldwells. Sabrina stepped closer to Naomi, lowering her voice but keeping it razor sharp. You know what the problem is? She sneered. People like you think proximity to power is the same as having it. A few guests nodded, as if bigotry became truth when delivered with confidence. But Naomi didn't look at Sabrina. She looked at the room. Eyes moved like a camera tracking through silhouettes of privilege. The senator adjusting his cufflinks to avoid eye contact. The wealthy widow clutching her pearls as if dignity were contagious. The group of tech founders watching with the curiosity of men who'd never been challenged in a room before. The expressions varied pity, discomfort, confusion, but they all shared one thing: distance. Not one person stood for her. Not one person said, "This isn't right." Even the musicians, fingers trembling over strings, continued to play a fragile, uneasy melody as if the music itself feared being reprimanded. Because that was the truth of places like this. The decor glistened, the wine sparkled. But the people? They hid behind etiquette to avoid confronting their own prejudice. Naomi felt every gaze, every judgment, every calculation of worth happening in real time. She'd lived enough years, survived enough rooms like this, to recognize the particular brand of condescension that only the very wealthy had perfected, soft around the edges, sweet in tone, but lethal in intention. And yet, she remained still. A sculpture of restraint, a woman who refused to shrink so others could feel tall. Across the table, a younger guest, a woman no older than 25, watched Naomi with a furrowed brow, something like doubt flickering behind her eyes. "She doesn't look scared," she whispered to her date. "Shouldn't she be trembling or something?" Her date shook his head. "No, that's the look of someone who knows something we don't." It was the first accurate observation of the night. Sabrina, oblivious, kept spiraling. "You should have stayed in whatever circle you crawled out of," she spat. "This room isn't built for you." The room fell even quieter, because even the privileged felt the ugliness of that line. A silence thick enough to cut spread across the tables, settling over the guests like a shroud. Sabrina didn't notice her arrogance blinded her, but the rest of the ballroom sensed something shifting. A tremor beneath the gold and marble. And then, Naomi lifted her chin, a tiny movement. But it changed the temperature of the entire hall. Her eyes, calm, deep, steady, cut through the chandelier's glow and landed on Sabrina with the precision of a verdict. She wasn't asking for validation. She wasn't waiting for apologies. She wasn't hoping for rescue. She was simply observing. The room. The people. The way they revealed themselves when they believed she was powerless. Because this wasn't just humiliation. It was data. And Naomi Cross always used data well. The shift was so subtle the crowd couldn't name it, but they felt it. Something was coming, something precise, something inevitable. And this time the room wouldn't be on Sabrina's side. For a moment, Naomi closed her eyes. Not in exhaustion, not in defeat, but in remembrance, brief, sharp, and grounding. Because scenes like this weren't new to her. They were chapters, and she had survived every single one. When she opened her eyes again, the chandeliers above her seemed to steady, as if the room itself recognized something it had overlooked. Sabrina didn't. Privilege rarely recognized danger until it was already drowning in it. "I ask you a question," Sabrina snapped, mistaking Naomi's silence for surrender. "Do you understand where you are?" Her voice echoed shrill against the marble, brittle under the gold light. But Naomi wasn't listening anymore. Her focus drifted, just for a heartbeat, inward toward a memory carried like a compass. Her grandmother's hands. Wrinkled, steady, scrubbing floors in buildings she was never allowed to walk proudly through. Hands that smelled of soap and tiredness, but carried a strength no legacy could purchase. "Dignity," Grandma Ruth once told her, "isn't something they can give you. It's the one thing they can't take unless you hand it over." Naomi never handed it over. Not when she was the only black girl in her accelerated STEM classes. Not when banks refused to loan her a dime for her first biotech research. Not when she worked 3 jobs to keep a failing lab alive. Not when 4 Fortune 100 companies underestimated her, then begged for her partnership months later. And certainly not now. Not because of Sabrina Caldwell. Not because of a ballroom full of people who couldn't see past their own chandeliers. A soft exhale escaped Naomi's lips, measured, intentional. Across the hall, a digital display rotated through sponsor logos, Vanford Steel, Titan Holdings, Lennox Pharmaceuticals, and then, almost unnoticed, a quiet slide appeared. Cross-Gene Innovations strategic partner Caldwell Wealth Summit. Few recognized the name, fewer knew the woman behind it. But the people who did? They understood that Cross-Gene wasn't a startup. It wasn't an experiment. It was a force. A quiet revolution in medical tech, valued privately at $22.4 billion. And Naomi was not just its founder, she was its owner, its architect, its heartbeat. While Sabrina saw someone out of place, Naomi was the single largest shareholder in the Caldwell family's most critical merger in over a decade, a merger the Caldwells desperately needed. A merger scheduled to be formally announced tonight. If Naomi didn't sign the final approval, if she withdrew her participation, if she pulled her capital, the Caldwell empire would fold like wet paper. Sabrina didn't know that. No one in the ballroom did. They saw a woman drenched in champagne. Naomi saw an empire one breath away from collapse. Her phone buzzed softly in her clutch, a discreet vibration felt through the tablecloth. She knew exactly what message it carried. "Dr. Cross, confirmation ready. Awaiting your signal." She didn't look at the screen. She didn't need to. Naomi lifted her eyes again directly into Sabrina's. There was no anger, no tension, just clarity. And clarity was more dangerous than fury. Sabrina scoffed at the calm in Naomi's face, mistaking it for fear she could control. "You should be grateful we even tolerate you in this room," she declared, voice swelling with the entitlement of someone raised to believe the world was curated for her convenience. "People like you don't get into these circles unless someone lets you in." Naomi tilted her head, studying Sabrina the way a scientist studies a specimen, quiet, thorough, almost gentle. Her voice, when it finally emerged, was soft enough to force the room to lean in. "No," she said. "People like me build the circles you stand in." It wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. But power doesn't need volume. It needs intention. A shiver rippled across the tables. The rumors from earlier began looping back louder, sharper. Who is she? Shay's not just anyone. Shay's too composed, too confident. What if we're on the wrong side? Tonight was supposed to celebrate the Caldwell family's rise. Instead, the first crack had appeared thin, delicate, but fatal. And Naomi Cross was the one holding the chisel. For a long second, Naomi didn't move. She sat beneath the chandeliers as if carved from something steadier than flesh, her red gown clinging to her in darkened wet silk, her shoulders squared, her breath even. The room pressed in around her, trembling under a tension no one could name but everyone could feel. The chandeliers flickered again, not dramatically, not like in movies, just a faint tremor light quivering against crystal enough to send a ripple through the rows of guests who suddenly felt colder without knowing why. Sabrina, sensing her dominion slipping, lunged to reclaim it. "Stop looking so smug," she snapped, voice rising in a brittle crescendo. "You're about to be escorted out. And when you are, nobody here will remember your name." But the problem was this. Nobody believed her anymore. Not even the people who wanted to. The crowd's posture had shifted. A senator leaned back instead of forward. A tech founder lowered his phone. The woman in pearls tightened her grip on her husband's arm, as though the room itself had become unpredictable. Naomi didn't answer. Sabrina. Instead, she reached slowly, gracefully, into her clutch. The entire room stiffened, not because they expected violence, because they expected significance. Every movement Naomi made felt deliberate enough to alter gravity. Her fingers brushed the silk lining, then curled around a familiar shape. When she withdrew her hand, she held a phone, slim, black, elegant. Water droplets slid along its casing, catching the chandelier's glow like liquid diamonds. Naomi placed the phone on the table, screen down, silent, but present. It was the calm before a verdict. Sabrina laughed too loudly, too quickly. "Oh, please," she scoffed. "Is that supposed to scare me? Do you think a phone makes you powerful?" But her voice shook, betraying a splinter under the surface. A few guests exchanged glances. Because they knew every empire built on money rather than merit had a natural predator: information. Naomi lifted the phone with 2 fingers, turning it so only she could see the screen. A single notification pulsed at the top, ready. Her expression didn't change. But the energy in the air did so subtly some thought they imagined it, so deeply others would remember it for years. She typed something with one thumb. Only one word. Begin. She didn't hit send. Not yet. She simply held her thumb above the button, letting the weight of possibility settle over the room like dust from a collapsing ceiling. Sabrina snorted, but even arrogance has limits, and hers was wavering. "What do you think you're doing? Texting your friends?" She spat. "This is real power, sweetheart. This family, this room, these people," she gestured around as if presenting an inheritance. "We built the circles you want to get into." Naomi's eyes rose slowly. The line was quiet, barely above a whisper. "You built ceilings," she said. "I build floors." The chandeliers dimmed for a breathless heartbeat. The quartet missed an entire measure. Half the room forgot to breathe, and something irreversible shifted. Sabrina stepped backward, just an inch, but enough for the entire ballroom to feel the balance tilt. Confidence leaked from her expression like water from a cracked vase. Several guests instinctively leaned toward Naomi now, gravitating toward the center of gravity instead of the source of noise. Because that's the thing about stillness. When the world is loud, stillness feels like truth. Naomi lowered her thumb onto the screen. A soft chime, barely audible beneath the violins, escaped her phone. A message delivered, a signal sent, a decision enacted. Not a threat, not a warning, a fact. The chandeliers steadied into a brighter glow, as if acknowledging the shift. Sabrina blinked. "What? What did you just do?" Naomi didn't answer. She didn't need to. Because somewhere above the ballroom on a floor the guests would never be invited to, an entire legal team stood up from a table, phones chiming, documents syncing, signatures unlocking. The storm had been silent, but it had begun, and the first person to feel it would be Sabrina Caldwell. Far above the glittering ballroom on the 42nd floor of the Lexington Grand, another world was already reacting. In a silent conference suite lined with floor-to-ceiling glass, a team of legal analysts, financial officers, and compliance executives stood at attention as their tablets lit up in unison. They didn't need a briefing. They didn't need context. They saw one word flash across their synchronized screens: begin. And that was enough. Within 3 seconds, encrypted channels opened. Within 5, internal systems recalibrated. Within 10, the Caldwell Cross-Gene merger worth $7, 9B on paper, and far more in long-term leverage, entered a standstill protocol designed by Naomi herself. A woman in a navy suit exhaled sharply. She pulled the trigger. The lead attorney nodded. Then we follow through. They moved with the precision of a strike team, quiet, efficient, lethal without theatrics. Files were retrieved, signatures queued for revocation, voting shares unlocked. The kind of legal choreography that didn't make noise but rewrote futures. Back downstairs, in the ballroom glowing gold and trembling with unease, the aftershock of Naomi's action hadn't reached the guests yet, but the room felt wrong, off balance. Tilted toward her, even as Sabrina desperately tried to pretend the tremor was only in her imagination. "What did you do?" Sabrina demanded again, stepping forward. "Answer me." Naomi didn't look at her. Instead, she lifted her phone, scanned the new notification that appeared, then turned it face down once more. An act so small, yet so unnervingly calm, it made the senator at the next table mutter, "She's not bluffing. Nobody that calm is bluffing." Sabrina's voice cracked. "You think you can ruin our family with a text message? Do you know who I am?" Naomi's gaze finally shifted to her slow, steady, deliberate. "I know exactly who you are." A hush swept across the hall. "You're a woman who mistakes access for importance, walls for strength, wealth for character." The quartet's bow slipped, screeching a wrong note that sliced the silence open. "And tonight," Naomi continued, "you thought humiliation was power." She paused, letting the words settle into the cracks forming beneath the chandeliers. "But real power," she said softly, "doesn't shout. And it never needs permission." Upstairs, another alert chimed. Caldwell Holdings, partnership contracts, frozen. On a secure server, the first of 9 investment agreements dissolved, untouchable now, irreversible, like dominoes falling through digital corridors. Back in the ballroom, a man near the stage checked his phone and went rigid. "Oh my God," he whispered to the woman beside him. "Look at this." She glanced down and gasped, hand flying to her mouth. They weren't rumors now. They were headlines. Sabrina's eyes darted wildly between the guests, seeing phones come alive everywhere, 30 screens, then 50, then more, each lighting the ballroom with the cold glow of truth. "What is that?" she demanded. "What are they looking at?" Nobody answered. Not because they chose silence, but because Naomi chose it for them. Sabrina grabbed a random guest's phone, snatched it right out of his hand, and stared at the notification. Her face drained, her lips parted, her voice broke. "No, no, this can't be real." But there it was, breaking news. Cross-Gene withdraws. Support Caldwell merger halted immediately. A collective inhale swept the room like the start of a chant that never formed. Sabrina staggered one step back, then another, her heels clicking unevenly on marble. You did this," she whispered. "You actually did this." Naomi didn't stand yet. She didn't raise her voice. She simply looked at Sabrina the way one looks at a crumbling statue and answered with a quiet certainty that made every muscle in the crowd tense. "You poured champagne," she said. "I poured consequences." A single crash sounded from the upstairs corridor. Someone had dropped a folder in the rush. Downstairs, Sabrina flinched. The storm had reached the building, and she finally understood. What she thought was humiliation was the warning. What she thought was victory was the countdown. And Naomi Cross had just struck 0. The ballroom did not erupt. Eruptions are loud, violent, chaotic. What happened instead was far more terrifying. The room tightened, as if the walls themselves inhaled sharply and forgot how to exhale. The chandelier's once glittering crowns now seemed to tremble under the weight of information pulsing from every glowing screen. A golden palace becoming a pressure chamber. 100 people absorbing the same truth at the same time. The Caldwell Empire was collapsing in real time, and its destroyer wasn't a hacker, wasn't a hostile competitor, wasn't a board revolt. It was the woman sitting silently in a soaked red gown, champagne dripping from her wrist like melted gold. Naomi Cross. Sabrina staggered backward, heels skidding on marble polished so perfectly it reflected her fear. She looked down at the phone shed, snatched hands trembling, breath shallow, mascara threatening to crack under the heat of panic. On screen, another notification broke through. FINRA alert. Caldwell Holdings trading temporarily suspended. A gasp swept through the room, because everyone in that ballroom had ties to money, influence, markets. And when markets bleed, the privileged always feel the first sting. A tech founder whispered, "This isn't a blip," a senator muttered. Someone just pulled the foundation out from under them. A socialite clutched her pearls so tightly they nearly snapped. This can't be happening at their event, but it was, and they all knew exactly who had the power to do it. The tension thickened, dense, electric, like the moment before a chandelier falls. Naomi lifted her gaze, slow, controlled, a movement that felt like the shifting of tectonic plates rather than flesh. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. Everyone in the room watched her the way sailors watch the horizon when the wind suddenly dies, hyper-aware, terrified of the storm they can't yet see but know is coming. Sabrina swallowed hard. This isn't permanent," she said, voice trembling. "Our lawyers will fix it. They always do." But her bravado cracked on the final syllable, and the cracks spread, because even she knew the truth. Their lawyers were upstairs, and they were not fixing it. They were running. A young assistant near the back glanced down at her watch as if timing the collapse. 3 minutes, she whispered. It's only been 3 minutes since she pressed send. 3 minutes? Someone repeated, stunned. She did this in 3 minutes? And then the real horror dawned on them. If she could do this in 3 minutes, what could she do in 10? Near the center table, a man in a navy suit, a hedge fund director, turned to his wife and murmured, "We need to get the hell out of this room." But his wife grabbed his sleeve, eyes fixed on Naomi. "No," she whispered. "We need to see how this ends." For the first time all evening, the attention in the room wasn't on Sabrina Caldwell. It wasn't on the Caldwell family. It wasn't on power inherited. It was on power earned. And that terrified Sabrina more than the notifications. She spun toward Naomi with a mixture of fury, desperation, and disbelief. "You're doing this to make a point?" she hissed. "Over a spilled drink? Over a misunderstanding?" Naomi didn't react. She simply lifted her chin just an inch. The room tensed as if responding to gravity's shift. Her voice was soft, but in the silence, it felt like scripture. "You didn't spill a drink," Naomi said. "You bared your character." Sabrina's throat tightened. Naomi continued, her tone steady as a metronome. "And I don't destroy empires, Sabrina. They destroy themselves. I only remove the illusion." A tremor of whispered awe rippled across the guests. Up above, on the mezzanine balcony, a group of staff hurried by, clutching tablets filled with red warnings. Even from a distance, their panic was visible, numbers plummeting, screens flashing, signatures vanishing. The orchestra faltered again, bows shaking, as if the instruments themselves sensed the financial freefall. Then beep, beep, beep. More notifications burst across the room like distant artillery. Caldwell Family Trust, assets under review. Caldwell Luxury Holdings, board emergency meeting. Initiated Caldwell Foundation. Funding reassessment triggered. Each alert was a blow. Each vibration another fracture. Sabrina's breathing grew shallow. You can't do this," she whispered. "You don't have the authority." Another voice answered before Naomi could. It came from behind. The crowd, deep, calm, devastating. "She has more authority than anyone in this room." The guests parted instinctively. A man in a charcoal suit stepped forward, Cross-Jean's chief counsel, his tablet glowing with the legal destruction unfolding upstairs. He bowed his head to Naomi. "Dr. Cross," he said, "Phase 2 is ready at your command." Sabrina's knees nearly buckled. Naomi finally stood, slow, poised, champagne cascading down her gown in shimmering rivulets. And when she rose, the entire room did too, not to help, not to stop her, but because her presence demanded it. She looked around the ballroom, marble, gold, fear, silence. Then she turned her eyes to Sabrina. "This," Naomi said, "is what happens when you mistake my silence for weakness." And the room, every chandelier, every breath knew the implosion had only just begun. Sabrina stood frozen, mascara trembling, breath catching in her throat as Naomi stepped closer, each footstep sharp against marble, each one stripping away another layer of illusion. The crowd parted without thinking, a silent instinct to move out of the path of something inevitable. "Security," Sabrina whispered, voice cracking. "Remove her." But neither guard moved. Instead, the older one cleared his throat, eyes lowered in sudden respect. "Mom." "She's on the list." At the top, gasps broke like glass across the room. Naomi stopped just a few feet from Sabrina, her soaked gown glistening under the chandelier's shaken light. She didn't raise her chin. She didn't need to. Her stillness carried more weight than Sabrina's entire lineage. Cross Jenna's legal counsel stepped forward, holding a glowing tablet. "Per updated filings," he announced, voice echoing through the hall. "Dr. Naomi Cross now holds controlling interest in every active Caldwell partnership." Silence detonated. Sabrina's lips parted, color draining from her face. "Controlling what?" Naomi met her eyes, calm, measured, devastating. "You poured champagne on the woman who signs your family's future." And for the first time all night, Sabrina finally understood. This wasn't humiliation. This was judgment. The collapse wasn't loud. It moved through the ballroom like a cold front, silent, unstoppable, merciless. One by one, guests stared at their screens as the Caldwell empire unraveled line by line, asset by asset, legacy by legacy. Funding frozen, partnerships dissolved, trust accounts suspended pending review. A dynasty, undone in minutes. Sabrina swayed, gripping the back of a chair as if the marble floor had shifted beneath her. Her voice thinned to a single broken whisper. "Naomi, please." But Naomi didn't gloat, didn't smile, didn't even look triumphant. She simply turned away, dignity moving with her like a cloak. "Empires don't fall because of enemies," she said softly. Enough for Sabrina alone. They fall when arrogance believes it can't. Then Naomi walked toward the exit, wet gown trailing purpose, the crowd parting like a tide around her. No applause, no cheers, just awe and shame. Behind her, the chandeliers flickered once more, not in celebration, but in acknowledgement. Justice had already left the room.